Every game, every side, every total. It's NFL week number 16. We've got 3 more weeks to go, and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know when it comes to betting on the entire card coming up this weekend. It is late. It is 9 p.m. Pacific on a Tuesday evening. This is usually the 9 a.m. show on Wednesday morning. I'm changing it up. I was dealing with some stuff this afternoon, might carry over into tomorrow morning. I'm sitting here tonight. I'm like, there's a lot going on in football. I'm fired up. I want to talk about football. I'm doing the live stream. If you're awake at this hour or you're on the West Coast, you're getting a bonus because this is going to be a slower live show than usual. I'm also kind of curious to see how it does traffic-wise. We changed things up on Sunday. It was very successful. We're going to do it again today. So if you are joining in, as always, leave the comments in the live chat. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, good morning. It is Wednesday morning, very likely for you when you're listening to this podcast. If you're listening the rest of the week, well, in the timeline down below, you're going to be able to jump game by game to get my thoughts and everything that you need to know when it comes to betting on these games coming up in NFL week number 16. With all of that said, let's get to it. We'll start off with Thursday night football. It's the Denver Broncos on the road at the LA Chargers. This number came off with a 3. It's currently LA minus 2.5 with a total of 42. And I look at this game as I look at a lot of other games this week. Not a ton of great betting opportunities, but I think a lot to talk about in all of these games. And so I'm going to do my best to kind of paint all the angles, give you some things to think about. We'll update things as we go throughout the week. So my big question here, what is the peak rating for the Denver Broncos? Because this is the first time all season that the rating for the Denver Broncos has reached this point in the aggregate ratings, in composite ratings, and market ratings. And when we think about the LA Chargers, this is now the lowest we have seen the Chargers rated for the entire season. And I think about just recent closers for these two teams with this number at 2.5. You're probably not giving the Chargers more than a point at most for home field advantage. It's one of the smallest home fields in the NFL. But I think about recent closers. 3.5 points better against Kansas City. The Chargers closed relative to the Broncos in that matchup. 2.5 points better. The Chargers closed relative to the Broncos against the Falcons in that matchup. And so, depending when you're looking at this, the gap between these two teams has been at least 2.5 points all season. Now this is getting pretty narrow. And really it becomes a question of, do the Broncos deserve the level of upgrade that they are getting? Because if we think about the last 4 weeks, all wins, all covers for Denver, but it's been against Atlanta, Cleveland, Indianapolis, and on the road at the Raiders. I think about those teams and the quarterback issues that they've been having. Certainly isn't the most impressive run of wins and covers for the Broncos. And when I look into the box score, they've only won the yards per play battle one time in those 4 games. And so to me, the question here is we're at 2.5. Are the Broncos deserving of this upgrade? Now, for the Chargers, there's certainly negatives and concerns. You have Justin Herbert playing through a high ankle sprain. You have a run game that has died and fallen off the planet. 35% rushing success rate since J.K. Dobbins went down. That run game is gone from this Roman system. So that's a big negative. And we look at the Chargers offense, they haven't scored more than 17 points in 3 straight games. So it's really struggling to get going and is a far cry from what we saw in the early part of the season. Now, what's interesting here when we talk about Justin Herbert, these two teams met earlier in the season. The LA Chargers closed 3-point favorites on the road in Denver. Justin Herbert played that game with a high ankle sprain. He had extra time to rest going into that game, but it was the same injury that he is dealing with in this game that they had then. And that was an offense that was struggling at that time as well. So a lot of parallels to that game. The one big difference, obviously the price and the venue. So interesting game back and forth as we see this number now down to 2.5 with a total of 42. Mike Shepard says the LA Chargers O-line is beat up. Not only is it dinged up, the run blocking is not there like it once was. It's been a big downgrade and a big step back in performance the last couple of weeks. Michael Berkowitz says, good evening, Adam. What a pleasant surprise. Let's get rolling. We're rolling. Mike, good to have you on another live stream. I know Gerard's probably missing this one down in Florida. It's a little bit late for him. It's got to be crushed with that Seahawks loss. Gerard, when you're watching this, I told you it was coming last week. And so we'll get to the Seahawks later on in the breakdown. But, yeah, that was a tough one for Gerard. So everybody hopefully thinking about him is not only did he lose the game, but he lost his starting quarterback. And now there's a little bit in jeopardy for this game. Speaking of quarterback injuries, potential losses, at least up to how we thought about it the last couple of days. Kansas City now a 3-point favorite over the Houston Texans with a total in this game of 41. And so the big story in this game, obviously, is the health and the status of Patrick Mahomes, who was a full participant in practice on Tuesday. Now, when we say full participant and we see it, and that's what triggered the move from Houston -2 to Kansas City -3 even money. It came after the full participant news went out. It hit the injury services, and that's immediately what got the line moving. That was a very generous full practice, and Andy Reid downplayed just how significant the practice was in his post-practice presser, where he was like, this is one of the lightest practices we have ever run. And so Mahomes was full, but it was no pads. It was no real physical activity. It was non-contact. It was as light of a practice as you could ever have as a pro football team. Wednesday is going to be a very important day to see if Mahomes is truly full as a participant in practice. In the video clips that were shared, he was certainly moving around on his foot very well. In the clips and the pressers that he did, he was talking about being in the building for 12 hours rehabbing. What are you doing for 12 hours? He's doing it. That's who he is. He tends to play through these things. We saw the market very wrong in the initial assessment of this number. There wasn't a lot of great injury info around Mahomes and his status throughout Monday and into Tuesday morning. It was very much going to be dependent on him. And as we have seen to now, even with the schedule spot that the Chiefs are in, Mahomes seems content pushing through this game and pushing through the next couple of weeks, saying that if they get the 1 seed, he's going to have extra time to rehab then with the bye week. And so that is why we see the big move here, and that's why Kansas City is out to a 3-point favorite. And so the question becomes, now with the addition of Hollywood Brown, who's very likely to play in this after being a full participant again, how do we start to rate the Chiefs? Is Mahomes 100%? Probably not, but you downgrade that a little bit. We were still at 4 in this game on a look ahead. Going from 4 to 3 at a less than 100% Mahomes with a wide receiver back in the fold is probably a fair price and probably a fair adjustment to get here. Now, when we start to think about the Houston Texans in this game, that to me is as difficult of a handicap, trying to figure out just exactly what we are going to get. Last week, Houston was incredibly underwhelming against the Miami Dolphins defense out of the bye. That Dolphins defense, just like the Jets go up and down the field on them, Houston goes for 3.6 yards per play and less than 200 total yards. The run game for Houston has been saving the offense all season. Kansas City's strength on defense is stopping the run. The Chiefs' defense has regressed, but the big issues have been defending the pass. And we just haven't seen Houston and Stroud, and more importantly, Bobby Slowick, open this thing up and let it fly. Way too many first and second down runs. And the Chiefs defensively can certainly set up and contain that and defend that well. I have more questions about what are we going to get from the Houston offense than it sits right now at Tuesday at 9:11 p.m. about what are we going to get from a Chiefs offense with Mahomes playing at less than 100%. That's how I would look at it. Houston, to put it in context, is a league worst in success rate on early down rushes the last 4 weeks. I mean, it's so bad watching this Houston Texans offense. And so if they're going to attack this Chiefs defense, it's got to be through the air. That's where they have to go. And we just haven't seen Houston do that successfully in quite some time. And now these takeaways for the Chiefs defense starting to show up. Spags has been calling for it. He's like, we didn't get a lot early season. Now they're starting to accumulate. So that could be a positive too in swinging things. And I struggle with this one, trying to figure out what in the world we're going to get from the Houston Texans on offense. Pittsburgh on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. This is a fun one to look at and to handicap, and is another game of several on the slate this week. There's so many that are either impacted by key QB injuries or key skill position player injuries. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, you have to watch for 2 names. And these 2 names are going to settle the entire matchup. They're going to determine who covers the point spread. They're going to determine if this game closes at 7 or trends back down a little bit more. This is all around George Pickens and TJ Watt. The status of both of them and their importance individually to both the offense and the defense cannot be overstated enough. George Pickens makes up more than 50% of the explosive play yardage that Russell Wilson has found since he took over as the starting quarterback. He has been vital to everything this offense does. And when you take him out of the picture, I know it was a very good Philadelphia Eagles defense they faced last week. This is not the same offense. It is not the same team. The explosive element is gone. And I mean, who is wide receiver 2 or 3 on this team? I don't think they have one. And it's really bleak when Pickens is not out there. What makes this very complicated at the moment is the injury services sent out an alert that said George Pickens was a DNP at practice. AI videos are getting great, and I'm getting old and I fall for AI videos all the time. There were videos going around all day on Tuesday of George Pickens doing the ladder and running on the side at practice. There was nothing about what he was doing that made him look like he was not participating in practice. I know there's specific guidelines for like where you are in the field and exactly what you're doing. He was certainly moving around pretty good for a guy with a grade 2 hamstring strain that was 50-50 to return this week and was almost 80% plus to return next week. With the importance of this game, you have to wonder what's going to happen. TJ Watt, his splits on and off the field for this defense for Pittsburgh have been documented extremely well in the past. 2 seasons ago, he missed a big chunk of time. The defense was about 8 points worse. They conceded about 60 yards more per game. Pressure rates came way down. Sack rate came way down. We know what his importance is. I'm by no means saying he is an 8-point player, so keep that out of the comments. That's not where I'm going with this. I think as a fair marker for an absence of Watt and an absence of Pickens, I think I could make the argument that is a 2-point drop for this team in total. I think that is a fair number to argue and a fair number to drop. Where this gets really weird, this number's only touched 7 at Caesars, and it did it really early in the week, and it was taken out. Nowhere else has gone to 7. Even though both of these guys are in jeopardy, as it's being reported by the team, as it's being reported by much of the team reporters. Earlier on Tuesday, Brian Batko came out. He's a Pittsburgh Steelers insider. He says both guys are going to play. So a lot of misinformation going around about what the actual status of both of these guys are. It's week 16. We get weird injury reports all the time. When we're talking about the number and where it is now, the Ravens closed -3 on the road in Pittsburgh for the first matchup. This is now -6. On its own, just at face value, I think that's a fair adjustment. If you take those guys out, this must close higher than 6. I have a hard time arguing that this would be less. And we also have a neutral opponent here when we think about Baltimore closing 5 points better than Pittsburgh did against Philadelphia on a neutral field. So if you get to 5 and you add home field for Baltimore, just on a recent closer against a common opponent, you're getting higher than what you're looking at here now. So my prediction, if both guys play, this is 5.5, 6. If both are out, this goes to 7. And the Steelers really are going to be in trouble on both sides of the football. Last thing that I would say here, Mike Tomlin has been very decisive in his game plan and what he's thrown at mobile quarterbacks this season. Did it against Jalen and Washington. Jaden Daniels, I was thinking Jalen Watson was coming over from the Chiefs defense. Did it against Jaden Daniels in Washington. Did it the next week against Lamar in Baltimore and had success both times. Can Tomlin repeat it a third time? Is a fair question. I think that deserves asking. And this is also a Ravens defense that out of the bye got guys back healthier, all of a sudden looked a lot better defensively against the Giants as well, held them to 150 yards prior to the final drive. So something to keep in mind and something to consider as well. Greg Van Epps, first time catching the Wednesday show live. Love the content. It really helps. Curious what you think of the Penix news and the adjustment to the line of it. Well, first of all, Greg, welcome to the live stream. This is good. We're catching some new viewers here late. A lot fewer people on the late Tuesday live stream than the early Wednesday live stream, but still good to see new folks joining the show. And Greg, I appreciate you watching it. And I appreciate you dropping the comment. We will talk plenty about that coming up with the game in a couple of games. We're going in rotation order. So we're to the Sunday games now. Before we jump into the Sunday games, I want to remind everybody the home stretch of the NFL service. You can join in at raspicks.com/NFL. Would expect probably 4 more releases in the regular season, and then I would say conservatively 2 in the playoffs. So probably about 6 more plays to go. We are at 56% on the season for full game sides in total. So if you want to join in for the home stretch, raspicks.com/NFL. Cleveland on the road at Cincinnati. Theme of the week, these quarterback injuries, quarterback changes, quarterback benchings. Here we have another one. We talked about it on Sunday night as it was the right thing to do for Cleveland. You just can't go forward with Jameis Winston playing the way he was playing. DTR will start in this game for the Cleveland Browns. Let's put this all into context because we saw a little blip of a move once the news came out. Some like stronger sevens turned into 7.5 for Cincinnati. So here's how we're looking at this. We'll use EPA plus CPOE, and we'll look at some numbers and just compare what we're getting from the Cleveland Browns in this game, making the switch to DTR. Last season, of quarterbacks in the league that played at least 135 plays, DTR ranked 48th of 49 quarterbacks for EPA plus CPOE. The only quarterback that was worse last year than DTR was Cleveland's other backup, PJ Walker. So PJ Walker now plays for the Calgary Stampeders in the CFL to put how bad DTR was last year into context. Now let's talk about this year specifically. Of quarterbacks who have run at least 240 plays, Deshaun Watson ranks 33rd of 35, and Jameis Winston ranks 27th of 35. When we look at the numbers specifically for EPA plus CPOE, Deshaun Watson this season is plus 0.013. Comparatively to last year with DTR, he was minus 0.03. And so it might not sound like a big number and a big difference. It's about, on average, 7 to 8 ranking spots for quarterback play over the course of a season for starters that play meaningful time. So Jameis Winston has brought a new ceiling to this Browns offense that both Deshaun Watson and DTR in their past play with the Browns have proven they are a very far cry away from ever reaching. It is a pretty significant difference between the level of play between Winston and the level of play of both of these quarterbacks. What makes this a little bit more intriguing was the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns played each other back in early October. That was a game where Deshaun Watson suffered the injury. Who ended up playing significant time in that game? It was DTR. Had 22 pass attempts. He threw 2 picks, 0 touchdowns against the Bengals defense that has been atrocious all season long. So even with this being a benching, and even with it being a quarterback change to a guy who's really seen limited time all season long, this is actually the Bengals playing a quarterback defensively that they have already seen, oddly enough, earlier this year. So that's a bit of a weird quirk that gets thrown into this. It's clear to see how much the downgrade is for the potential ceiling. You can make the case he's had time to develop. He's a different quarterback than he was last year. All of that may be fair and true. It's still a very far reach to get to a level that Winston was playing at when you're switching to DTR. There's probably not going to be the same high level of variance in turnovers and everything that Winston has brought with him anywhere he's gone in the league. Certainly something to consider if you're trying to argue and justify a backup quarterback bump in this game, which I just don't really buy into this applying. You still have the Cincinnati Bengals needing to win out in order to keep their playoff hopes alive. They need a lot of help elsewhere. Joe Burrow at the end of the Titans game seemed to be going at Zach Taylor, calling him out. We know he called out the offense and the defense 2 weeks ago, has been backing up that play since. There's a lot of questions as to what the Bengals are mentally on both sides of the football, but I think there's now a lot of questions about what the Browns offense can even possibly be with DTR as the starting quarterback under center. Detroit Lions on the road at the Chicago Bears. Bears are 6.5-point underdogs with a total in this game of 48. Detroit closed -10 back on Thanksgiving when these two teams played, and it was one of the sharper moves I've seen all season. Wednesday night before Thanksgiving at Circa, the 10s were wiped out, went to 8.5 when there was so much willingness from bettors in the market to take Detroit. That move was massive and obviously came through, and everybody on that move cashed in and was a winner. Very telling to see how the Lions were faded in that game. We now have the venue swaps. You're taking away a big home field advantage for Detroit. You're giving some of the typical home field advantage for Chicago back to them. You're getting to 6.5 from the 10 through the 7. It's a fair adjustment for the venue switch and considering how that market played out last time these two teams met just a couple of weeks ago. The question and the handicap of this game is two-sided. The first side is, what do the Lions have left on defense? If you remember back to Thanksgiving, the Bears game was the game where everything started to go really poorly for the Lions with defensive injuries. That's when they started losing guys. They lost Malcolm Rodriguez. That's the game they had multiple defensive linemen go down. And that's when all the injuries really started to pile up, and it became the big talking point going into the Green Bay Packers game the following Thursday. Last week, they suffered two massive losses. They lost Carlton Davis for the rest of the season. They also lost Aleem McNeil for the rest of the season on the defensive line. So since these two teams played and that price was what it was on Thanksgiving and it was bet how it was bet, you're now downgrading the Lions for the loss of their best remaining starting linebacker, their best defensive back, and their best remaining defensive lineman. Those are three massive losses from the defense that you were taking away, and you now have to figure out a way to price into this matchup. We saw the Lions rating peak at about 8.5 points better than an average team in the composite ratings. That number has now come down, and there's a question of should it deserve to come down even further? And I think that that's fair to say. And that kind of takes you into the second part of this handicap where you're wondering, what are you getting out of the Chicago Bears? The big question for me is seeing the defense the last 2 weeks. It's looked a lot different and it's looked a lot worse than what the defense looked like under Matt Eberflus. He's a defensive-minded head coach. That was his unit. That was the side of the ball he focused on most. He is now removed. Thomas Brown, clearly unqualified to be anywhere close to a head coach in the NFL, is obviously overwhelmed on the sideline. Caleb Williams' body language looks quite silly, to be frank, when you're watching it for a quarterback that's leading a team. You know there's issues in the locker room and have been for weeks, and there hasn't been that response to the coaching change that was expected. So what do you get in this game? Because in the first matchup, the Bears had to make a very specific defensive adjustment to avoid getting run out by the Detroit Lions. The Bears were playing with a lot of nickel and a lot of defensive backs on the field. Detroit was running all over them. I believe it was Eberflus that made the switch to play more base, bring in extra linebackers, and from the third and fourth quarter, they were really able to get off the field and get run stops. Now, there's obviously more to it that goes into making that change on defense, but the mind and the leader of that defense is no longer with the Bears. I would think there's an upper hand that now gives the advantage to Ben Johnson, both seeing that and being able to dictate effectively what he might want to do in this game, knowing that the best defensive coach on that Bears staff is no longer there. All that said, we're at a number that's adjusted to what I would say is close to a fair price, and it becomes, again, another game that's a very interesting handicap this week. And I keep saying that, and I'm going to keep referencing it. At this time, we've bet nothing, and we have released nothing on the service. And so this is going to be a show I know a lot of folks are watching, see what I'm thinking, to see what I'm picking on. This is a lot more of me just trying to give you all the sides and all the info that I can to hopefully help sway or push you towards a decision you might be thinking about making, more so than it has been kind of a pick show for the last several weeks, just because I'm not making up things we haven't bet on. That's not what you're getting from the show. And you're going to hear a lot of back and forth on this. So there's going to be the inevitable comment. I watched for an hour and 20 minutes. You didn't give me anything. It's one of those weeks, especially at this time. Might change as the week goes on. It's a very difficult week of NFL betting. I'll put it that way. I would say it's the hardest week that we have had the entire season collectively here as bettors. Arizona on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Cards 4.5-point favorites. Total in this game 47.5. Arizona playoff hopes very, very slim. They're around 11% make probability. They have to win out. They have to get a lot of help. This is a much better matchup for them than what they have had the last few weeks on offense specifically. Kyler Murray, significantly better against zone coverage than he is man. We're talking about a top 10 quarterback against zone, a bottom 10 quarterback against man. Kyler Murray, significantly better this season when he is kept clean in the pocket versus facing the blitz and facing the pass rush. I think about the few teams that he has faced the last couple weeks. A Seahawks defense that started to play a lot more man coverage, a Seahawks defense that's been much more effective rushing the passer, a Vikings defense that blitzes a ton and rushes the passer. It's been brutal for what the Cardinals have faced. Now they get a reprieve here. Carolina defensively on the season, dead last for pressure rate. They seldom blitz. They play zone coverage at one of the highest rates in the league. They had multiple injuries at the linebacker group again last week. And so not only is Arizona going to look a lot more comfortable passing the football because of the matchup with Murray, they're going to be able to run the football, which I think is most important. We saw last week against the Patriots, they're able to get the run game going, and all of a sudden the offense looks a lot better. This team at its core wants to be in 12 and 13 personnel. They want to run the football, open up the play action game, and then hit passes that are easy to tight ends and wide receivers down the field. It's all set up by the run game up front. Everybody league-wide is able to run on Carolina. So a lot of positives in this game for the Arizona Cardinals offense. If there's any urgency left over, you would expect this is a game where you're probably going to get a very good showing from the Cardinals offense. Now, where this becomes a little bit difficult is you start to look at the price. The Cardinals are 4.5 points. Carolina and New England are rated equally in composite power ratings. They're about 6.5 points worse than an average football team in the NFL. They have the same rating. Last week, Arizona closed basically 6.25, 6.5 at home to the New England Patriots. So now they go on the road. You're giving Carolina a small home field advantage. You're taking away a little bit for Arizona. Like, what else could this number be than an expensive 4 or 4.5? You just get right to that number every single time. And we saw one book earlier in the week open 4.5. We saw another open 3.5. Both of those were bet almost immediately. Everything settled at 4, and now it's leaned slightly higher, I think, because of a lot of the matchup advantages you see on the field. The other question that I would have in this game is you have a Cardinals team off of a big win. You have a Panthers team off of a big loss. What do we look like for the Panthers offense, and what's the expectation there? The last 4 weeks, to be fair for Carolina, where they've been competitive, aside from last week, which was kind of the regression game, they played the Cowboys pass rush, which is one of the most aggressive in the league. They played the Eagles pass rush, which is one of the best in the league. They played the Chiefs defensive front, which is one of the best in the league. And then they played Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers, who are very familiar with this Panthers offense, seeing Young multiple times last year, and are also incredibly aggressive. Arizona is not that at all. It's a completely different class of defense. And so I would expect Bryce Young to look a little bit closer to the Bryce Young that we saw against those other teams, more so than what we saw from Bryce Young in this offense last week against the Cowboys on that pass rush, because the Cards are bottom 7 in terms of blitz and pressure rate. This is, for a good reason, the second highest total of any Panthers game all season long. Waffles GT, Connor ladder. It's going to be a very, very big ladder to climb. A very big ladder to climb. But matchup-wise, the ladder might be worth climbing. I'll tell you that. Dice Capital, good to have you back for another live stream. You're saying pretty tight market now that we near season end. This is the first week where it's Mike's blocking it, but you're really kind of putting it through the ringer for how tight everything is. And I did the Sunday evening live stream. And usually, I mean, you guys know, you watch the live streams. You see me get excited about a couple of games. I'm like, there's one total. Okay. There's a card, there's possibles. I remember finishing on Sunday and I was like, oh no, like I don't feel like I gave anybody anything to think about, let alone something to consider. And that's just, it happens as you get into the later portion of December for sure. New England on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills 14-point favorites. Total in this game, 46.5. Not a lot to say or talk about here. There's a couple things I think worth addressing and thinking about when you look at this handicap. The first would be just kind of putting the number into context. The direct reference point that you could look at would be last week, the Ravens 17 against the Giants. Ravens rated about half a point better than the Bills in the ratings. The Pats are about 2 points better than the Giants in ratings. And so you have about 2.5 points less in terms of this matchup versus that matchup. That one closed 17, was about 14.5 with Baltimore in New York for the majority of the week. And then QB News pushed that up. There was game day money on Baltimore. So it's not crazy to get to 14, and it wouldn't be crazy to see this slightly higher. When I think about the matchup, it is going to be cold in Buffalo. That's not unique for New England to be playing in, given their obvious location. What it does tend to do when you see temperatures in this mid-20s or lower, there's not a big drop-off in scoring, but there's about a 5 to 8% dip league-wide in passing offense. What that is likely to mean is we see the Bills run the football more. And the Bills, prior to these two indoor games the last 2 weeks, were really leaning on the run game a lot. And they were putting Josh Allen under center, which was different and unique. And we saw the Bills team take on a bit of a different identity. Then they went indoors, which is like their alter personality, where it's just, let's score 40 points a game because we can. And we finally get to play indoors on turf, and all the rules are out the door. But what we saw them prior to those 2 weeks was really a changing and developing offense that was really relying on the run game. The New England Patriots defensively have been atrocious against the run all season long. Arizona, we just talked about them and what they want to do running the football. They had no issues finding big runs against the Pats in that game. They scored 30 points. What's the ceiling and the expectation here for Buffalo running? They're a better running attack. They're a better pass and run blocking team up front. They're going to be able to find just as many explosives, and we're seeing multiple backs now emerge. There's still a very high offensive ceiling, even with the pass expectation drop because of the cold weather. I think it sets up pretty well for the Bills offensively against this Pats defense. The Gerard Mayo stuff is worth noting as well. He really threw his offensive coordinator under the bus following Sunday. Just left Van Pelt hanging, so much so that he had to come back the day after and apologize and downplay just how bad it was. There are mixed reports about what's actually going on in the locker room. There's not a lot of positivity. It's a lot of negative commentary about how he's handling this team and what the state of the Patriots locker room is, that I think is reason for concern down the stretch. New England has been a team that has fought to the end of the fourth quarter in so many of these games, top 10 in EPA per play in the fourth quarter since May took over. They're a very good kind of backdoor team. They're a very good get the total over late in the game team. And because of how poorly they are defending the run, when teams get a big lead, they're still finding chunk plays against this Patriots defense late in games too. So you see things get a little bit wonky for Pats games late in the fourth quarter. There is going to be an effort definitely to run Drake May more in this game than he has possibly in any other game in the past. In theory, the Pats run game should find success against the interior of this Bills defense. But if the Bills are still down 3 starters in their secondary, perhaps there's a bit more of an aggressive approach taken by the Pats early to try exploit some of that. I just don't know what we're getting out of the call out of Alex Van Pelt and how much of that call out was about not running the football more and pushing things more with Drake May on the ground. And if it's a head coach that's frustrated and kind of clinging on, and he's taking on a first-year offensive coordinator, and he has this specific mandate for running more, although it might be advantageous against the Bills' defensive front, it's not really playing into the big weakness that even the Lions couldn't take advantage of because they were trailing so early in the game. So if the Bills again get out and have a big lead early, it kind of negates some of that advantage that they have in the back end. So tough number to play. I think a tough total to play as well. When you think about the cold and some of the dips, you're going to be at the mercy of long drives, stalling in the red zone, potentially with the amount of running that's going to take place in this game. It's going to be a quick clock as well. Pat's overs have been great. I don't think this is one of them this week. Philadelphia -3 with a total of 45 on the road at Washington. Not a ton for me on this game specifically because there's a lot of kind of messy stuff going on here. I will say Washington has been the sharpest side of the week so far in the market for sure. 4.5s didn't last. 4s got taken out. 3.5s now taken out as well. Very telling move early in the week here on Washington. I don't know how much buyback we might get later in the week. I have a couple theories as to what's going on and why and what the intrigue might be, but it's all kind of speculation on my point. The big question I think that we're going to see is just price-wise. The first meeting closed Philadelphia -4.5 at home. This is and was the same price on the road with the venue flip. So that's pretty substantial. Washington closed -2.5 versus Pittsburgh. Philly closed -5.5. And that was a common opponent recently. And so we're still thinking that like we're getting a little bit shorter than what this number even still is now to an argument. It's kind of at the floor now. Composite ratings too have Philly 4 better on a neutral. So what's Washington getting for home field? So certainly price went into this early in the week. Some people could definitely see that this price was a little bit long in favor of Washington and took out some of those numbers. The big issue last week for Washington was they could not protect Jaden Daniels. He was sacked 8 times, which was a season high. And there is kind of a deteriorating element to this offense that goes beyond the Cliff Kingsbury stuff and how much his offenses have struggled late in the year. I know Daniels was injured for a chunk, but the O-line is not blocking like it once was earlier in the season. Daniels is not avoiding sacks like he once was earlier in the season. So there's something going on there that's a negative. Tyler Biadasz last week missed. He's the center. I think that was certainly part of it against the Saints. He missed due to an illness. He's going to be back this week, so that would be a positive against this Eagles defensive front. And then there's also some speculation here as A.J. Brown was the bad end of a hip drop tackle. What is his status? Is he injured? He said he was fine post-game. Based on how that hit looked, it suggests possibly otherwise. Saquon Barkley openly said he's dealing with an injury. He's not 100% and was praising Kenny Gainwell. And then we also saw Jalen Hurts, chain and all at the podium, talking about how he has a broken finger on his non-throwing hand that is impacting his performance. He looked pretty good throwing last week, but those are the 3 key players for the Eagles. They're all dealing with some level of injury. So at 3, I would be surprised if it goes any lower. I think this is the floor for what we're going to see. I don't know what it might take to get this back up, considering the quality of the move that we saw in terms of who was betting it and the group that was playing it. I think that's going to be enough to hold this a little bit lower than those initial numbers that were taken. The only thing that might push this back is if there's just resounding full practices for everybody on the Eagles all week. New York Giants on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta 8.5, total 40.5. Here's the fun one. Mike Penix is in. We see Kirk Cousins benched. And the change I think everybody has been calling for a long time is finally happening. So I can go a lot of ways with this game. I think the most interesting thing to think about is the Atlanta Falcons offense, which has really been struggling the last couple of weeks. On Monday Night Football against the Las Vegas Raiders, had 23 first down plays. Guess how many times they ran the football out of 23 offensive plays on Monday Night Football? If you haven't seen the Barnwell article yet and you weren't watching the game, you probably won't know the number and you probably won't be close. Of 23 first down plays called on Monday Night Football against the Las Vegas Raiders, the Atlanta Falcons ran the football 22 times. That's insane. Even Bobby Slowick was sitting at home and he was jealous of the Atlanta Falcons and how much they were running the football on first down. You never, ever, ever see that. And so not only has the Falcons offense been struggling, not only has Kirk Cousins been struggling, the arm injury, I think, is real. The Achilles injury is real. We had the clip from Dan Orlovsky today circle around media, and Dan was talking about the production meetings leading up to Monday Night Football, where he was interviewing Kirk Cousins privately specifically. And he was saying that Kirk Cousins was basically telling him, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I'm struggling so bad. I don't have an answer for it. And this is the guy who is leading the Falcons offense. And so as bad as the Falcons offense has been, that's a damning assessment. And we're seeing the Falcons evidently coaching and calling plays around Kirk Cousins in the pocket. So this, to me, is a pretty big reset for the Falcons offense. I think even with it being a first-time starter, which is about as extreme as you can get at this point in the season, I have to see it as a positive. And I want to say that the positive is going to be relative to expectation. I think that's a fair thing to point out. The total is 40.5. The point spread here is 8.5. A positive increase for the Atlanta Falcons is not them going out and hanging 35 points. If you're getting in this game a 27-point performance, like, you're exceeding expectations in a huge way. So it's not like Penix has to do anything crazy here to elevate what the Falcons offense can be and boost them up. I think there's enough skill position talent on the Falcons team that as long as play calling here is semi-competent and not trying to coach around Penix and do anything crazy, we are going to see Atlanta move the football pretty easy in this game. The one negative that I would say is, for the majority of the season, Penix has got no reps with the starters. You're obviously going from a right-handed to a left-handed quarterback. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember who Gruden switched to that was a lefty a handful of years ago when he was with the Raiders. I can't remember who it was. If you're in the chat right now and you remember, let me know. I vividly remember seeing interviews with Gruden talking about how difficult it was in season to shift from a righty to a lefty with limited practice time and limited acclimation time. And so what might happen here is you get the weird drops or the miscommunications, not necessarily because of the routes, but just because of how the ball is coming out. I think that there's something real to that. And I think that that's something to kind of think about as you're looking at this game and saying, it has been a downgrade on the side. It has been a downgrade on the total. That just sits in the back of my mind as something to think about. I view this as it's going to be a positive for the Falcons offense. I don't know if it changes everything in the course of the season. They switch into a different team. Just Kirk Cousins was 29th in EPA plus CPOE, which was only better than guys like Levis, Rush, and Locke, who were backups or benched over the last 2 months of play, right? Like, we are talking about like bottom level QB play. Can it really be worse with Penix? That would be a pretty big ask to have. So that's kind of how I look at the Falcons. Now, what makes this handicap I got to come up with a different word than fun. I think it's a fun handicap because everything's fun about the NFL right now. I'm talking about it with you guys. How low can the Giants get for ratings? Right now, this week, well, we can go to last week. They, in composite ratings, were 8.3 points worse than an average team in the NFL. Carolina last year. Do you remember how bad the Panthers were last year and how just horrible everything was? Like, think about how bad the Panthers were last year. Carolina finished 2023 7.3 points worse than an average team in composite ratings. Houston, remember back 2 years ago to Houston, that tanking Houston Texans team that won the late game in week 18 with the heave to the end zone that couldn't beat anybody and was a disaster. Remember that Houston Texans team? They were 6.4 points worse than an average team at the end of the season in composite ratings. So the Giants right now are on a trajectory that is a full point worse than the Panthers were last year and 2 points worse than the Texans were 2 years ago. They're the lowest rated team at any point of any of the past 3 seasons. And that number this week, when everything is updated tomorrow, is probably going to be even lower than 8.3. Do the Falcons, even with the QB switch and even with the upgrade, do they deserve to be warranted a price tag like this, which is their biggest of the season? Their past 2 was 6 against the Raiders on Monday night, and then there were 6 earlier in the season against the Panthers. That's a different scenario for them. And this is as bad of a Giants rating that we've seen on them all season long. The other question that I would say is, if this is a Tim Boyle game for the Giants, amid all the negativity going on for the Falcons and all the issues that the Giants have, there were 2 post-game pressers for the Giants and Monday pressers that I thought were kind of a sign of positivity. Malik Neighbors has said basically nothing positive all season about anyone on the Giants roster ever. And post-game, he's like, I was really impressed with Tim Boyle. He came in, he looked like a first-string quarterback. It was great. I felt like we had a really good connection. And then the camera went to Tim Boyle, and he's like, man, Neighbors is such a great player. You just got to chuck the ball up there for him, and he's going to make a play. If I'm in there, I'm trying to get the ball to him every time I can. Like, there hasn't been anything great said by anybody from the Giants that's like slightly positive in months. And then in a 35-14 beatdown by the Ravens, Tim Boyle and Malik Neighbors were like, man, that was pretty good. So, I mean, that to me stood out as like, well, if it's a Tim Boyle game and he's just kind of chucking it up to Neighbors and you put this offense indoors, like, is this going to be the worst offense and the worst team that we've seen in the last 3 years? Like, maybe not. I don't know. And so that certainly stood out to me. I will say that Boyle in the game against the Ravens defense had a couple of good drives, a couple of long drives. One of them was empty on like a 60-yard drive. He's probably more of an over quarterback than what you're getting with DeVito or what you're getting with Locke, but I have no idea who's starting for the Giants, and it has not been announced yet. So that's kind of making you wonder where things are going to go. But I mean, who wants to oppose any of this? I don't know. Again, fun handicap. Fun is the word of the week. It's a very fun week for handicapping. I've been talking a lot about these games. There's a handful more that have a lot of good info. There's 2 of them that are a little bit lighter on info. Tennessee on the road at Indianapolis. Another game, another QB switch, another kind of question mark. Mason Rudolph will start. Brian Callahan was probably grinning ear to ear when he got to announce that Will Levis was benched for the rest of the season. He wanted no part of Levis several times this season, and I'm surprised it took this long. Let's put into context the difference between Mason Rudolph and Will Levis, like we have done with other quarterbacks that have been shifted in this week so far. The Titans offense has had 185 plays this season with Mason Rudolph, 381 with Will Levis. The Titans offense is 10% better in success rate and nearly 0.2 points per play in EPA per play better with Mason Rudolph. So that is a big upgrade in terms of production that you were getting with Mason Rudolph versus Levis. Much longer sample size with Will Levis. I would expect, if we're being realistic about it, you're probably meeting somewhere in the middle of that 10% and plus 0.19 EPA per play difference. I think that's probably what you get to for a Titans offense. Mason Rudolph played 2 tough defenses, Lions before all the injuries and the Bills. And then he played two easier defenses, Cincinnati and New England. When Mason Rudolph has been under center for the Titans, Calvin Ridley's performance has gone way up, and Chiga Kwankwo's performance has gone way up as well. And we saw that last week when Rudolph came in and he was just firing targets at Chig over and over and over again. We'll see if the prop market is picking up on that. And so you're getting a better offense this week from the Tennessee Titans with Mason Rudolph, just going off of the numbers and the expectation. Now, for the Colts, the defense has been sneaky good since getting guys back in week number 9. They played the Vikings, which is a top 10 offense. They have played the Bills, which is a number 1 offense. They played the Jets, which, believe it or not, is a above average offense. They played the Lions, which is a top 5 offense. Then they played the Broncos and Pats in 2 other games as well. The Colts over that time span against that difficult schedule are top 10 in EPA per play on defense. Getting guys back for Indianapolis has been significant on the defensive side of the field. And I would even say in that Broncos game last week, I mean, they were conceding nothing to Bo Nix, and the performance in that game is very much overshadowed by Jonathan Taylor and Adonai Mitchell and the turnovers and the mistakes and what happened. That was a pretty good performance by the Colts defense. It's not like they're stepping up significantly in class here going up against the Tennessee Titans offense. So that's probably a game here where you see an advantage for a Colts defense to look a little bit better than they might be given credit for. The Titans are also 5th worst in red zone scoring offense this season. There hasn't been a massive difference between Rudolph or Levis for that. This game does seem ripe for some long drives that stall inside the 10, which seem to be pretty common for Tennessee. But it also seems very ripe for a lot of turnovers and a lot of short fields with Richardson under center and even Mason Rudolph, the upgrade he brings. There's some volatility that comes with that too. And Colts games have certainly taken on pretty messy profiles the last couple of weeks as well. LA Rams -3 total in this game is 46.5. The Jets have played every game over since week 11. We have seen the offense move all the way up to 11th in EPA per play over that time. The defense has fell to 27th in EPA per play on that time. Now, if we want to compare weeks 11 to 15, where the offense has jumped to 11th and the defense has dropped to 27th, to weeks 1 to 10, the full season leading up to that, the offense was 20th, weeks 1 to 10. The defense was 17th, weeks 1 to 10. So the defense has fell off 10 spots. The offense has improved nearly 10 spots. That's why we're seeing this big spike in overs. That's why we're seeing this big spike in scoring, because the Jets are scoring a lot more and they're giving up a lot more points. Pretty simplistic to put it that way. Duh, it's obvious, but I think it's important to put that into context to just illustrate what the type of jump might be. There could be reason to believe that that gap widens even further in this game, especially if the Jets are going to be without 3 of their top starters in the secondary. There's a chance that we see Carter, Reed, as well as Eccles, who's hit the injury report, and then Clark as well, starting safety. All of those guys are injured. All of those guys are in doubt. Jeff Ulbrich, for whatever reason, just emphasizes the fact that cornerbacks are not going to play hurt in his offense. And he's been really willing to hold guys out. And he was talking yesterday about how he's really intrigued by getting young guys circulated in to the defensive backfield to see what they have. And so I don't even think that there's a need or a willingness by him to rush some of these guys back too. When I think about the matchup this week, if you take those guys out of the secondary, my God, like the Rams, they're going to be picking these guys apart. I mean, there's no match. I mean, the Jets didn't have a great answer for Mac Jones. The Jets didn't have a great answer for Anthony Richardson. I mean, now you're getting Matthew Stafford red hot in this Rams offense with extra time to prepare coming in, picking off some of these backups in the secondary. I mean, that's a big problem. The Rams potentially suppressed a little bit. They played San Francisco in that weather game on Thursday Night Football. They are in full control of their destiny, if you will, in the NFC West. If they win out, they will be in line to win the division in Week 18, hosting the Seattle Seahawks at home to seal the season series and to get the tiebreak. And so you certainly have a lot of motivation from the Rams, but Aaron Rodgers continues to kind of make a late season push. I think really we're seeing him play out of a lot of spite. We're seeing him finally healthy. He's arrogant as ever in his post-game pressers this week. He was arrogant as ever on the McAfee show. He's just not, after almost nearly being benched 3 weeks ago, there's serious commitment that we're seeing from him to leading this offense. And against this Rams defense that still is a touch overrated, that becomes a pretty intriguing storyline to watch. Michael Berkowitz, Jets plus 3.5 because I love pain. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That is a good way to put it for the pain part as a Jets fan. Moshe asks, thoughts on getting CLV this NFL season? Feels like it hasn't mattered the most for some reason. Evidence also suggests that because books seem to be getting slaughtered. I will be honest, I have not done like a full breakdown of what games are closing relative to previous seasons, what the average is per week, things like that. So I don't have a good baseline or anything. This is fully a subjective take from mine, from just what I have felt over the course of the season. Number one, visibly, there was way more manipulation in the market than I have seen in seasons past, for sure. I think there's people that are able to take stances earlier than usual that are setting things up for them. We're seeing very consistent timing for moves later on Tuesday through Wednesday. It's been very different. There's been a lot less game day movement than there has been in seasons past, is something I have noticed. I think part of the manipulation is working hand in hand with trying to disguise CLV potentially for account longevity purposes at the biggest players in the world. I think that's becoming a very common thing, or at least an effort to do so. I would also say that there has been more disagreement in sides and totals in terms of back and forth, not just around key numbers, but overall, way more than I ever remember happening. Very few games per week that are not really dictated by like a significant injury. There's been very few like runaway games where you're like, I'm betting this Sunday night at open. I'm getting a few thousand at the opening limits, and I'm taking this because I know this is going to close 2.5, 3 points better. Like this one is off, whatever led to that. For the last several seasons, there's been a couple of those spots a week, 1, 2, 3. This year, you're just not getting that. And I felt like that has been very different. There's been such a willingness to play back. I do think, too, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, there's 5, I would say, public shows, services, websites, groups, releases, whatever category you want to put those people in. I would say there's about 5 that have like visible market impact when they do something, us being one of them. I think there's more awareness around that happening than ever before. And there is a faction of people who are playing both sides of that. And they're playing for middles, or they know they're coming. They're more aware of where it's coming from. They're more aware of who's doing it. And even if they're not playing middles, they're just saying like, I don't believe that that person is worth such and such to this number. I'm just going to blindly play it back. And that's causing a lot of back and forth. There's a number of things that just like I've kind of observed and taken in. I don't know if that's a great answer because it's not rooted in any like numbers or comparison to past seasons. That's just kind of what I'm feeling and what is going on. And it's been a very challenging year betting based on how I would say things have worked in the past. A lot of like the traditional spots have not come through. There's been a lot of end game noise in that. A lot of times you can kind of feel the late drive coming in the fourth quarter, or you can see the line movement throughout the week, and it's just kind of lingering on that because it got too far. It's kind of been hanging within 3 or 6 of the spread, and you're like, okay, here comes the late drive. And you just kind of expect those spots to come through. This year, I mean, not only have those drives not come through, but it's like the other team is pick 6 and run it back, or there was a big play and they ended up winning by like 14 and the side was never even close. It's been a lot of that too. That's a bit of a convoluted ramble, but at the end of the year, I think we'll definitely be able to look back and have some time to see what exactly was going on. But that was kind of my feeling of what's happening. And I know it's been a challenging year for a lot of folks. We've been fortunate so far to be at that 56% mark on full game sides and totals. And the last few weeks look very challenging. So I'm hoping we can stay at that level the last couple of weeks going into the playoffs. And maybe there's a bit of a playoff reset where things level out and you get some of these games going kind of as expected is maybe a fair way to put it. But yeah, it's been one of the more strange and unusual years for sure for betting the NFL. Minnesota -3 on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. This one entirely dependent on what we see from Geno Smith health-wise. If this is a Sam Howell start, Minnesota closes. A 6 might be too far. 5.5, probably a fair number. This number is definitely more shaded towards Geno not playing. It's about 55-60 Geno not playing versus is how I would say. I think that's what we see it get back to and where it ranks. Now, Mike McDonald used the word optimistic about Geno Smith's status for this week. He used that word about DK Metcalf a couple of weeks ago, and Metcalf missed more time than expected. Greg at the Coach Speak Index had a couple references to him doing it earlier in the season where it came through. So it's very unclear trying to decipher through McDonald's words to see what he's actually thinking or tipping anything off. There's not a lot there. Honestly, this number in this game and the side and the total is all going to come down to whether or not it's Geno starting. If it is Geno starting and it's a reduced mobility Geno that isn't able to navigate the pocket as well as he has, that's probably going to be problematic against this Vikings pass rush. I do question a little bit how great this Vikings defense can be. They're 6th in defensive success rate allowed since week 9. I see a lot of noise in the schedule a little bit. Flacco was a quarterback they faced. He's gone. Jones in Jacksonville was a quarterback they faced. He's the backup. Levis they faced. He's now benched. Murray scored 23, and they were lucky to only concede 23. Last-second win. Cousins, they conceded 496 yards to the Falcons offense. Very lucky to hold them to 21. Had a bunch of turnovers, and then Caleb Williams. So they're not going through like this elite schedule of defense and putting up massive numbers. It's been very impressive, but I think the perception of a Flores defense and how it's actually been playing relative to schedule is a little bit misguided, I would say. I think that's a fair assessment to make. And they're not really running away with a lot of yards per play differential in games either, despite how great Sam Darnold has been playing. He's 8th of all QBs this season in CPA plus EPA. He's also 52nd, or he has a 52% success rate on the season. I got a ton of numbers being jumbled up on this one in my mind. So he's obviously been playing great. And this is a matchup where I think about how effective Kevin O'Connell has been as a play action play designer and a play action play caller. Seattle is number 2 against the pass, but they're number 31 when defending play action specifically. So Sam Darnold is certainly going to have opportunities to find big plays. Receivers are certainly going to be wide open in this game. And if Geno Smith is not on the field, Sam Howell playing catch up against this pass rush and against this defense is forget about it. It's not happening. And so this is entirely dependent on who starts a quarterback. Obvious comment. But if it is a Geno game, this is going to be less than 3, I would expect. If it is a Howell game, I think this threatens 6. Something to watch for prop-wise. Mike McDonald did local radio, and I was listening to it on Tuesday. He was talking about how post-game he went to Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, and was upset that they were not running the football more against the Packers. He said that coming into this game, he wants to run the football more and run it earlier in the game. There's a chance that Kenneth Walker will be back for this game. when we think about the prop market and we think about kind of the style of play we might expect, this is definitely going to be one where Seattle, based on what McDonald is saying, wants to favor the run. If you want to attack Minnesota's defense one way, especially early in the game, it is running the football on them. And so that's certainly something to keep in mind when you're looking at this and thinking about it prop-wise and beyond. San Francisco on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins -1 with a total of 44.5. I have nothing on this game. There are 16 games on the board. I can tell you about 15 of them. I have got nothing for you guys on this game whatsoever. And that is a terrible thing to say as a podcast host who is here to try give you information. This is just a weird game that is very difficult to handicap. I have no idea what is left for San Francisco. I have no idea what is left for Miami. I have no idea what this shell of the Dolphins offense that we have seen at different times of the season and last season, I have no idea what's left remaining of it. I do not know. There has been a strong stance taken on the under so far in the market. I can't tell you if I agree or disagree with that either. I'm being completely honest here. I've got nothing for you in San Francisco, Miami. I was not going to talk about it. Last week, I did not talk about a game, and I skipped it, and there were like 15 comments about it. And so I want to save everybody the time for commenting. I just have nothing here, guys. I apologize about that one. Robert McMahon says NFC North teams are killing it outside of the division. That continued last week as well. Is it 31-3 now, if I'm thinking correctly, or 30-3 outside of the division? It's been very one-sided. Tampa Bay -4 with a total of 48.5 on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of credit for Liam Cohen and what he has done with this Buccaneers offense. And as much as the Bills get talked about for what they do when they go indoors and play opponents, I think the Buccaneers deserve a bit of credit in their own right for what they do when they go indoors and face an opponent. If we go back earlier in the season, that game where they went on the road to play the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, nearly 7 yards per play, 350 yards total. When they went indoors to play the LA Chargers last week, they end up with a final tally of 506 yards, 7.7 yards per play. When they went on the road to play the Saints indoors, they scored 51 points, had 594 yards of total offense, 8.2 yards per play. They get indoors, everything speeds up. Baker Mayfield looks comfortable, and man, they put up numbers. And it's a very similar profile and a very similar style that they take on as to what we see from the Bills. It's just two different offenses. And Cohen, the way that he has been pulling some of the strings in this has been incredibly impressive. The only game this season where it was not just an overwhelming performance was that Lions game back in week 2. But I think about Cohen and how long it took for him to get kind of settled. That was his second game as an OC playing the Lions in that game. Since then, as things have got comfortable, it has been very dominant. They get another indoor game here against the Dallas Cowboys, who are coming off a big win in their own right against the Carolina Panthers. Something else that is emerging from the Buccaneers, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, it was injury dependent. Now we're seeing just revert back to it by Cohen, is the use of 3 tight ends on the field and really pushing heavier sets. Last week against the Chargers, they went with 3 tight ends on the field, 10% of snaps. It was the highest of any game this season, had heavy personnel at a very high rate too. If you think back to Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, there was always concern about him and the happy feet in the pocket. You guys must remember that and thinking about it. You're seeing him and he's jittering around in the pocket and he doesn't know where to go. And you're just watching it as a bettor, just sweating off the bad decisions, thinking like, when's he going to turn the ball over? It's coming. Something that was done to protect him from that during his time in Cleveland was going to heavier personnel and working play action into the offense. And the reason they did that was because he got extra protection. He also likes throwing to tight ends and targeting them. It makes the outside decisions a little bit easier, and it just lets him settle in the pocket. Cohen has done a good job of opening that side of his play up, and it's just made him a very, very effective passer so far throughout the season. When I think about the matchup here against the Dallas Cowboys, they don't use as much nickel as what we saw from the Chargers with several defensive backs on the field, not a lot of linebackers. Cowboys tend to play things a little bit differently, so they might not be pushing that as much this game as they have been in recent weeks, but it's hard not to think about the injuries that the Cowboys have suffered in the middle of the field and now how thin they are on the backside of that defense in the secondary. This could become a pretty difficult matchup for the Cowboys defensively to take on this Buccaneers offense that now has a lot of looks to it that can be very dynamic. On the other side, this is going to be Cooper Rush really stepping up in class in terms of the opposing pass rush that he is going to be forced into facing. Not trying to get into any puns with the name and the rush, but think about who he has played so far this season. They've played the New York Giants with the defensive line that was decimated and beat up on Thanksgiving. They played the Cincinnati Bengals, who have exactly one pass rusher specifically on the field. And we're down other guys on the defensive line too, but that is a one-man pass rush. And then they played the Carolina Panthers. Not only are all of those teams very bad at defending the run, which opens up opportunities for the Cowboys offense, but they're very bad at getting pressure and rushing the opposing quarterback in the pocket. Tampa Bay, much different challenge in that regard. And so this is a much different opponent for Cooper Rush and this Cowboys offense to face. CeeDee Lamb is still lining up for potential with some of the injuries the Buccaneers have in the defensive backfield, but this is a much taller task for Cooper Rush and this Cowboys offense, certainly. Then Monday Night Football to wrap up the live stream. If you guys have questions, get them in the live chat before we wrap up. There's more than 100 of you on here as we get past 10:15 p.m. Pacific time, 1:15 a.m. on the East Coast. I would love to know if anyone's watching on the East Coast and what in the world are you doing up at 1:15 in the morning. But if you have any questions before we wrap up, drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. I want to remind everybody quickly, home stretch of the NFL service. I would expect 4 to 6 more releases total between now and the Super Bowl. raspicks.com/NFL. New Orleans on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Packers 13.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 41.5. Possible snow game. It is going to be cold. The Saints are the indoor dome team going outdoors to Lambeau to play on Monday Night Football. That is only going to exaggerate the home field advantage that the Packers have. Alvin Kamara dealing with a groin injury. I think his status very much in doubt to play in this game. I would fully expect the Saints to announce Spencer Rattler as the starting quarterback in this game. Now the question becomes, what in the world do we get to for a price? Is this too high? Is there potential here? Earlier in the season, around the midway point, when the Saints had all of the same injuries that they do now, if Kamara is injured now, that would be a new injury added that would lower things even more. The Saints with Rattler hit 5.6 points worse than an average team in composite ratings. Last week, before the Washington game, the Saints were at the exact same rating they were earlier in the season. So the market was handling the injuries and evaluating the roster talent the same way as they were earlier in the season. And there was an argument that the Saints could have been the worst team in the NFL at that point. If you take Alvin Kamara out of the lineup, I think they're very much in consideration for that, which would get them in that 7.5, 8 point worse than an average team range. Now, if we're just looking at that and we're comparing it to where the Packers are, you can get to 13.5. And if you add in the home field advantage that is probably exaggerated, and you think about the on-field matchups, there's probably a case to make that this number could be a little bit higher, certainly. What do the Saints struggle with the most? The answer to that is defending the run. They're 30th on the season in rush defense for success rate. They really struggle defending the run. Where have we seen the Green Bay Packers have a ton of success on offense? Running the football. Josh Jacobs has been a monster all season. Matt LaFleur, in his week-to-week run game planning and run scheming, has been masterful. It has been as good as it gets. It is thrilling to watch. Dan Casey, one of my favorite follows on Instagram, he just cuts up run plays and puts it to fun music and like random clips. I mean, every week he's pulling something out new from Matt LaFleur, looking back to Denison College, like the parallels he's going to with some of these run game play calling is really fun to watch. This seems like just a dream matchup for LaFleur in the run game. If it's cold, if the pass game's a little bit limited because of that, you see that 5 to 8% drop, and it becomes a run game in a big way. I mean, Green Bay is just going to have a heyday with what they want to do, and LaFleur is going to absolutely take advantage of this defense. And so I think you're certainly looking at this as a big Jacobs game, and Love just continues to look more and more comfortable in the pocket, especially with all of his guys back. So this is a just brutal spot for the Saints defense. And offensively, if you take out Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller comes in. Think about those TD props, but it's a big ask of Rattler to go on the road into Lambeau and do a whole lot here. So, okay, well, Green Bay looks pretty appealing. Here's the problem. We talked a little bit earlier when I was answering that question of like how weird the season has been and a lot of the things in the CLV. I feel like this thing right here has happened 20 times this year where it's like we're checking all the boxes here. And then you get to the fact that the Packers obviously are laying their biggest number of the season. They have a massive game on deck on a short week against Minnesota that's going to go a long way to deciding where the Packers rank in the playoffs. So that's not great to have sitting on deck at all when you're looking at laying 13.5 in a game that's going to be tighter with a short total where there's going to be a lot of running. As bad as the Saints might be, it's just enough to kind of be like that negates a lot of what you're looking at as potential options and potential advantages. So that's a bit of a downer to any of the Packers upside in here when you're looking at this number. It's just not an ideal scenario to be backing and to be betting into. So that kind of ends up doing it for Green Bay in this card. Something that came to the top of my mind that I wanted to point out about Thursday night specifically, it skipped my mind and it came up now. I didn't mention it during the breakdown. Look at the NFL playoff picture if you have a second before thinking about betting on Thursday night football. The Bills and Chiefs, barring something pretty extreme, are locked in at 1 and 2. How the order is going to determine, we'll see. Hopefully it's a Bills 1 seed for the sake of those futures. We have the Chiefs futures from preseason. It goes well either way. But KC, Buffalo 1-2. And then depending how Pittsburgh and Houston finish, you're looking at those 2, 3, 4. The Broncos right now are 6th. The Chargers are 7th in the playoff picture. The Broncos 9-5. The Chargers are 8-6. It's not fully for this, but that game on Thursday Night Football between the Broncos and the Chargers is effectively a game to not play at Buffalo or at Kansas City in the first round of the playoffs. That it was pretty significant motivation behind that. I cannot imagine why a team would prefer to go to either of those destinations rather than potentially playing at Pittsburgh or indoors against Houston. So I think that certainly matters, especially when both of those teams have obviously played KC in the division as well. And so that's just a little bit of something I forgot to mention for that Thursday night game that I think is worth pointing out. I think it matters, and I think it's going to be bought in. Umis says, still up getting information, knowledge about the NFL. I appreciate you staying up. I appreciate you hanging around. Doug, I'm on the East Coast doing my last-minute Christmas shopping. Where are you shopping at 1:15 in the morning? I would love to know. He says he's a first-time listener. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to tune in, time out of your night, time out of your morning, however you want to do it, to join in. Nick C says, might have been Chris Sims at Tampa. I think that's a very good call as well. All right. Hour and 19 minutes. Not too bad. I appreciate everybody for stopping by. I hope you have a fantastic Tuesday evening, Wednesday, rest of the week. Next week, the Sunday evening show that I do after the late games, I'll do it after Sunday Night Football, Tampa Bay Dallas. So that'll go live around 8:30 Pacific. It'll be posted Monday morning. That will be the show for the week. Obviously, with Christmas Tuesday or Christmas Eve Tuesday, Christmas Day 25, Boxing Day 26. There's no numbers for shows published during those days. I've tried it. You guys all have much more important things to do with friends and family than listen to me talk about football. So I'm going to have everything up by Monday morning for everybody to listen to and get ready. And then I'll do either a Friday morning or Saturday morning live stream and catch up and just kind of update for the Sunday games. The schedule next week too, there's like 6 Saturday games. It's like 6 or 7 Sunday games. It's a mess. So everything will be covered at least at a very high level Monday morning, and that'll serve as the show for the week. And then I'll catch up with the live stream either Friday or Saturday. We'll see how things are going over the course of the week, and I'll keep you guys updated for that. So that's something to keep in mind if you're a YouTube viewer when you're coming back for that. If you haven't hit the subscribe button and you enjoyed the show, a great time to do it now. Double check if you think you have, just to be sure that you've hit it. It's down below, and leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video before you check out. Thanks, everybody, again for stopping by. Have a fantastic rest of the week. We'll chat to you bright and early Thursday morning on the podcast feed.